The floor of secrets. The first day I walked into the Moretti mansion, the silence felt alive. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence that comes with wealth or privilege. It was the sort that made the air heavy, as though the house itself carried the memories of everything it had witnessed and refused to forget. I was only there to clean, to do a job that most people would turn down without thinking twice. But for me, a steady paycheck was not a choice. It was survival. My daughter, Sophia, was 5 years old and already knew how to count the days between my paychecks. When I told her I had found work in a grand mansion overlooking the cliffs, her little eyes had shone with hope, not realizing that sometimes beautiful places hide the darkest truths. I started early that morning, my hands raw from the mixture of soap and lemon polish as I scrubbed the marble floors of the main hall. The surface gleamed under the chandelier's golden light, and yet there was a faint discoloration near the staircase, a shadow of something long cleaned but never forgotten. "Make sure that mark disappears before the master comes down," Mrs. Bianchi, the head housekeeper, had said to me in her sharp, commanding voice. Her words carried the authority of someone who had seen too many maids come and go, most leaving without notice. I didn't ask what the mark was, nor whose hands had left it there. I learned long ago that curiosity was a dangerous luxury for women like me. You learn to look without seeing, to listen without reacting, to breathe quietly even when fear tightens your chest. By the time the tall clock in the corridor struck 9, the marble shone like liquid glass. My knees ached, my palms stung, but I kept working, pretending not to notice the presence that had silently filled the room behind me. The weight of it was unmistakable, commanding, watchful, patient. It was as though the air itself leaned toward him. "Miss?" The voice that broke the silence was low and steady, smooth yet threaded with something dangerous like velvet hiding a blade. I turned and my breath caught. He stood there in a dark gray suit that fit him too perfectly to be off the rack. His posture was one of effortless power. His eyes, a deep hazel that could look soft if they wanted to, but chose instead to study me the way a lion studies movement in the tall grass. There was no mistaking him. Lorenzo Moretti, the man whispered about in every corner of the city. Some said he built half of Milan with his money. Others said he built his empire with secrets and silence. All I knew was that I worked in his house now, and that meant I had to earn every breath I took inside it. "You're new," he said, not as a question, but as a confirmation. His gaze flicked over the bucket beside me, the brush in my hand, then back to my face. "What's your name?" "Elisa," I replied quietly, forcing my voice not to tremble. "Elisa Romano, sir." He nodded once, a single, efficient motion that carried more weight than a dozen words. "And who sent you?" "Mrs. Bianchi, sir. I was told to clean the foyer before your meeting." A brief pause. Then he stepped closer, his polished shoes silent against the marble. "You work hard, Miss Romano," he said finally. "That's rare here." He looked down at the floor, at the faint shadow of the mark that no scrubbing could erase completely. "But next time use warm vinegar for marble. Bleach ruins the shine." I blinked, surprised, not just that he noticed my work, but that he cared enough to correct it. He wasn't supposed to notice me at all. Men like him didn't. "Thank you, sir," I murmured. He studied me for a heartbeat longer, then added, "You have a daughter." My hands froze around the brush. "Yes, sir. I make it a point to know who works under my roof," he said simply. "The children of those who work for me shouldn't go hungry." His words struck me harder than I expected. I hadn't told anyone here about Sophia. The only mention of her was the photograph tucked inside my locker, a picture taken on her first day of preschool. Somehow he knew. That evening, when I returned home, a large brown paper bag sat at my door, filled with groceries, fruit, and a note written in elegant handwriting. For Sophia. Eat well. LMI stared at the note for several minutes before slipping it into a drawer. I didn't know what kind of man Lorenzo Moretti was, but I knew generosity from men with power often came with invisible strings. Still, when Sophia smiled at the food that night, her laughter echoing through our small apartment, I told myself it was only kindness. Just kindness and nothing more. A week later, Mrs. Bianchi handed me a keycard and a warning. "The master wants you to handle the East Wing now. That's his private floor. Don't open drawers, don't touch personal items, and don't speak unless spoken to. You'll be watched." Her tone made it clear that being watched wasn't a figure of speech. The East Wing was different, less like a palace and more like a museum of memories. There were books left open on tables, half-finished glasses of water, a jacket thrown carelessly over a chair. Signs that someone lived here, not the untouchable tycoon the world saw, but a man who carried his solitude like a shadow. As I dusted the tall shelves of the study, I noticed the photographs. None were recent. One showed a younger Lorenzo standing beside a woman with dark hair and kind eyes, her arm around a boy of about 10. I wondered who they were and what had happened to them. Curiosity, his voice said from behind me, smooth as silk but twice as sharp, is both a strength and a danger. Miss Romano. I jumped, nearly dropping the frame. He was standing by the doorway, sleeves rolled up, a loosened tie around his neck. He looked less like the distant businessman and more like someone halfway between exhaustion and control. I was only dusting, sir, I stammered. I know, he said softly, walking closer. But I also know that look, the one people get when they try to read the past from a photograph. I swallowed hard. I didn't mean to pry. For a moment he said nothing. Then his eyes flicked to my wrist, where the sleeve of my uniform had slipped just enough to reveal the edge of a faded scar. It was old, one of many I kept hidden under long sleeves in silence. His gaze lingered there, not with judgment or pity, but with a stillness that made me want to hide and confess all at once. "Who did that to you?" he asked quietly. My breath caught. "It's nothing, sir. An accident." His jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Don't lie to me, Elisa. You flinched when I spoke your name. That's not the reaction of someone untouched by cruelty." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. "It doesn't matter," I whispered. "It was a long time ago." He studied me for a long moment before nodding once, though something dark flickered behind his eyes. "Maybe," he said, "but some ghosts don't leave unless they're forced out." That night I couldn't sleep. The way he had looked at my scars unsettled me. Not because it was invasive, but because it was the first time someone had looked at me and truly seen me. Not as a maid, not as a single mother, but as a person carrying a past she never asked for. The next morning when I arrived for work, Mrs. Bianchi told me my schedule had changed. "From now on you'll be assisting only in the East Wing." The master's orders. I should have been relieved. It meant higher pay and better hours. But instead I felt something twist in my chest. Lorenzo Moretti had noticed me, and men like him never noticed without reason. By the end of that week, strange things began to happen. The landlord who had been threatening to evict me for months suddenly found my missing payments. Sophia's school sent home a letter saying her tuition had been paid in full by an anonymous sponsor. And every night when I returned home, a new small gift waited by the door. Books, fresh fruit, once even a little stuffed bear. I wanted to believe it was kindness. But deep down I knew better. Power never gives without purpose. And as I lay awake one night, watching Sophia sleep peacefully beside me, I realized something chilling. Lorenzo Moretti didn't just want to protect me. He wanted to own my silence, and perhaps my heart as well. The house of glass and shadows. The first time I began to understand the weight of Lorenzo Moretti's power was not in the way people bowed when he entered a room, nor in the whispers that followed him wherever he went. It was in the quiet things, the invisible ways he could move the world around me without lifting a finger. It was in the landlord's sudden politeness, the grocery store owner's unexpected discounts, and the way Sophia's school principal greeted me with a smile that was far too rehearsed. Everything had begun to shift in my life, subtly but unmistakably. And though I wanted to believe in miracles, I had learned long ago that nothing in life came without a price. Still, there was something different about this. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet power, the kind that spoke through actions rather than words. And that made it all the more terrifying. Every morning, I climbed the wide staircase that led to the East Wing, my uniform freshly pressed, my hair tied back neatly, my heart steady but wary. The East Wing had become familiar now, the scent of old wood, the faint trace of cologne in the air, the books that seemed to multiply overnight. It was a part of the mansion that breathed differently from the rest of the house, warmer, softer, alive in a way that almost felt human. And at its center was him. Lorenzo, always precise, always calm, and yet somehow unpredictable in his silences. One afternoon I was dusting the piano in the sitting room when he walked in. He didn't announce himself as others did. He never needed to. His presence filled the space the way sunlight does when it breaks through the clouds, suddenly, completely without apology. "You play?" he asked, his voice low and unhurried. I hesitated, my hands freezing mid-motion. Not really, I replied after a moment. I used to a little when I was younger. My mother taught me before she passed. My words stumbled on the memory. I hadn't spoken of her in years. Then you should play again, he said simply, coming closer. Music remembers what we try to forget. I almost laughed at that. It was the kind of thing people say when they've never had to start over from nothing. But there was a sincerity in his tone that stopped me. Tentatively, I pressed a key. The note rang out, trembling and imperfect, like a memory rediscovered. I played another, then another, until the melody of an old lullaby filled the air. It was a tune I used to hum to Sophia when she was still a baby. A tune I thought I'd buried with the rest of my past. When I finally stopped, the room was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock. You have scars on your hands too, he said after a pause, his gaze tracing the faint lines that ran across my fingers. I instinctively curled my hands into fists, hiding them. They're from an old job, I murmured. Kitchen burns, nothing more. But even as I said it, I could feel the lie between my teeth. He knew it too. You don't have to hide from me, he said gently, his tone softer than I'd ever heard it. Pain leaves marks, yes, but so does survival. Sometimes those marks are proof that you endured what others wouldn't have survived. Something about his words lodged deep inside me, echoing long after he left the room. For years I had seen my scars as shame, a reminder of weakness, of choices I regretted, of nights spent in fear. But when he said it, survival sounded like strength, not failure. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Over the next few weeks, the rhythm of my life began to change. Lorenzo rarely spoke much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He started asking me questions, not the kind that pry into pain, but the kind that make you think about who you are when no one's watching. He asked about Sophia, about her favorite books, her dreams, and I told him about her love for drawing and how she wanted to paint the biggest sky in the world someday. He listened with a focus that unnerved me, like each word I spoke mattered in ways I couldn't understand. Then one morning, he called me into his office. The room was large but strangely bare, except for the massive oak desk and a single framed photograph. His mother, I would later learn, a woman of quiet dignity whose eyes mirrored his. Sit down, Elisa, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I want to talk to you about your future. My future. The phrase itself sounded foreign. For years, my world had been measured in bills, meals, and hours of sleep I could afford to lose. The future wasn't something I thought about. It was something I survived toward. He folded his hands on the desk. I've been observing you. You don't just clean rooms, you notice things. You think. You solve problems before anyone else even realizes they exist. His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was a glimmer of something else in his eyes. Respect, maybe. I'd like you to take on a new role, he continued. A position that involves more responsibility and more trust. I stared at him, not quite understanding. I'm not sure I'm qualified for anything more than what I do now, I said carefully. That's not true, he countered. You underestimate yourself because the world taught you to. He slid a small folder across the desk. Inside was a contract. The offer was simple. He wanted me to become his personal assistant, not a servant, not a housekeeper, but someone who managed his schedule, coordinated events, handled private communications. The pay was triple what I earned now. My hands trembled slightly as I closed the folder. Why me? I asked finally. You could hire anyone, someone educated, someone with experience. Because trust, he said quietly, is rarer than skill. And I've learned to value what's rare. That evening, I told Sophia we might have to move closer to the mansion. She clapped her hands in excitement, imagining adventure, not realizing how tangled life had just become. I signed the contract the next morning. Working directly under Lorenzo was like being drawn into the orbit of a planet. He had his own gravity, and everyone who came near him either adapted or burned. I began to see more of his world, the endless meetings, the guarded phone calls, the people who spoke to him with smiles that never reached their eyes. I also began to see the cracks in his armor, the late nights when he sat alone in his study staring at a single page of an old notebook, the moments when his composure slipped just enough to reveal something haunted beneath. One night, long after the rest of the staff had gone home, I found him in the library, sitting in near darkness. "You should rest," I said quietly from the doorway. He didn't turn immediately. "Do you know why I built this house, Elisa?" he asked. "Because my father destroyed every place we ever lived. I thought if I built something strong enough, high enough, no one could reach me again. But walls don't protect people. They just make loneliness quieter." His words startled me, not because of what he said, but because he said them to me. The man everyone feared was confessing something fragile. I stepped closer, the soft sound of my shoes on marble the only response. "Maybe walls aren't supposed to protect," I said after a moment. "Maybe they're supposed to remind us that it's okay to open a door once in a while." He looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw warmth in his eyes, not the calculated charm of a man used to control, but genuine gratitude. In the weeks that followed, something shifted between us. He stopped giving orders and started making conversation. He would ask about Sophia's school projects or hand me books he thought I'd like, or sometimes, when we worked late, he'd bring me coffee just the way I liked it. Too much sugar, not enough milk. Small gestures, but they chipped away at the distance that had once defined us, and yet every kindness made me more uneasy. Because I knew men like Lorenzo did nothing without intention. One afternoon when I entered his office, I saw him reading a folder with my name on it. My heart stuttered. "You're reading about me," I said quietly. He didn't look up immediately. "I was," he admitted. "I wanted to understand what kind of woman walks through fire and still learns to smile." The words should have flattered me, but instead they filled me with fear. "Some fires," I said slowly, "don't leave when you escape them. They follow you." He closed the folder and met my gaze. "Then maybe it's time someone helped you put them out." That night, when I came home, Sophia ran to me with her latest drawing. A house with big windows, sunlight pouring in, and two figures standing side by side. "That's you, Mama," she said, pointing at one. "And that's the nice man who always sends me books." I froze. "What man?" "The one with the kind eyes. He saw me after school today and gave me a chocolate. He said he works for Mr. Moretti." My pulse quickened. The realization hit me like a wave of cold water. Lorenzo hadn't just entered my life. He was quietly weaving himself into every corner of it. I sat on the floor beside Sophia, holding her small hand, her trust shining through her innocent smile. And though part of me wanted to believe this was protection, another part whispered that I was standing in a house made of glass and shadows, one where kindness and control looked dangerously alike. As I tucked her into bed that night, her small voice murmured sleepily, "Mama, he said good people can come from dark places. Do you think that's true?" I looked out the window toward the distant lights of the mansion, the silhouette of power etched against the night sky. "I think," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, "that even the darkest places sometimes hold the brightest hearts. But we have to be careful who we trust to light the way." And as the city slept beneath a blanket of stars, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lorenzo Moretti's light, warm, protective, intoxicating, was the kind that could either save us or burn us completely. The weight of secrets and the price of truth. It is strange how quickly life can turn from something you endure into something you almost begin to believe in again. For weeks, I found myself walking through the grand corridors of the Moretti estate with a sense of cautious calm, as if I were learning to breathe in a different atmosphere. The air inside those marble walls always seemed to hum with hidden tension, the kind that comes from people used to power and secrets. Yet beneath the elegant chaos, there was a growing rhythm of something gentler, something I couldn't quite name but felt every time Lorenzo spoke my name in that careful, deliberate tone of his. There was kindness there, yes, but there was also something heavier, something that trembled under the surface like an old wound that never really healed. I began noticing small things that didn't fit. A phone call that would silence the room. An unfamiliar car parked outside the estate gates for hours at a time. The way Lorenzo's expression would harden when certain names were mentioned. His hand unconsciously brushing the ring he wore on his right hand. A simple band of silver engraved with a faint emblem I didn't recognize. It was clear that whatever world he came from, it was not one where peace came easily. Yet he was careful to keep me and Sophia at a distance from it, as if protecting us from a storm that had already claimed too much of his own life. That thought, though comforting, also frightened me, because I knew storms never stayed at bay forever. They always found a way to come home. One night, while sorting through old files in the study, I found a faded photograph tucked between two ledgers. It showed a young woman standing in a garden of white roses, her smile soft, her eyes filled with the kind of quiet joy that feels eternal. She looked familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. On the back of the photo, in elegant handwriting, were the words, "For Lorenzo, may light never forget you." I turned it over again, staring at her face, and then it struck me, the shape of her eyes, the tilt of her smile. I had seen that face before, long ago, in a newspaper clipping from the fire that had taken everything from me. My breath caught. That woman had been one of the casualties listed beside my husband's name. The world tilted for a moment. I told myself it couldn't be the same person, that it was a coincidence, but something inside me knew it wasn't. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house felt magnified. Every shadow seemed to whisper a secret I wasn't ready to hear. When dawn came, I went to Lorenzo's office, the photo clutched in my hand. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He looked at the photograph, then at me, his expression unreadable. "You found that?" he said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "And I think I know who she is. Or at least I think she was connected to something I lost." He stood and walked toward the window, his back to me. "Her name was Clara," he said finally. "She was my sister." The silence that followed was thick like the air before a thunderstorm. I swallowed hard. "Your sister?" He nodded slowly. "She died years ago, in a fire." His voice broke slightly on the last word, and I felt something inside me crack open. "That same fire," I whispered, "took my husband." He turned to face me, and for a moment everything between us shifted. The distance, the titles, the walls. There was a shared ache there, a recognition of loss that bound us more tightly than any kindness or trust ever could. The next days were a blur of memory and questions. I learned that Clara Moretti had been working with a charity organization in the old district, the same one my husband had been managing when the explosion happened. The official reports had called it an accident, but the pieces didn't fit. Lorenzo's quiet fury when he spoke of unfinished business told me that he didn't believe in accidents. The deeper I looked, the more I saw how our past were woven together by invisible threads, threads that led to people who still held power in the city, people who would rather the past stayed buried. Despite the danger, something inside me refused to turn away. I began to help Lorenzo with research, sorting through old files and financial records. What began as curiosity turned into obsession. I needed to know why that fire happened, who started it, and why innocent lives had been taken. It wasn't just about closure anymore, it was about truth, and the quiet justice that every survivor deserves. One evening, as rain lashed against the mansion's windows, Lorenzo placed a thin folder on my desk. "You should see this," he said softly. Inside were photocopies of police reports, old bank statements, and a single page with my husband's name circled in red ink. "He wasn't responsible," Lorenzo said, meeting my eyes before I could ask. "But he was set up to take the blame. Someone needed a scapegoat, and when the fire happened, he became it." My chest tightened as I read the words. All these years I had carried the guilt of not saving him, the shame of not knowing what really happened. Now that burden shifted into something sharper. Anger. "Who did this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lorenzo hesitated. "A man named Gabriel Sardo. He was my father's partner once. After Clara's death, he took control of the business, turned it into something darker, something that fed off people's fear. I've been trying to dismantle what he built ever since." The room seemed smaller suddenly, the air heavy with everything unspoken. "So all this time," I said quietly, "you've been fighting your own family." He nodded once. "It's not about revenge anymore," he said. "It's about redemption." Then softer, almost to himself, he added, "For her. For me, maybe for you too." I didn't know what to say. There were no words big enough for the weight of it all. But I knew then that our paths hadn't crossed by accident. We were two broken people pulled together by a shared history neither of us had chosen. The thought scared me, but it also gave me a strange sense of strength. Because if fate had brought us here, maybe it was giving us a chance to rewrite the ending. From that night on, the boundaries between our worlds blurred. We began working side by side, sometimes until dawn, chasing leads, piecing together the puzzle of lies that had stolen so much from us. And somewhere in those long nights, something wordless began to bloom between us. A trust that felt fragile but real, like light filtering through cracks in a shattered wall. But the closer we got to the truth, the more dangerous things became. Strange calls began coming to the house, voices that hung up when I answered. A car followed me once when I picked up Sophia from school, vanishing only when I reached the mansion gates. When I told Lorenzo, he simply said, "They're watching. But don't be afraid. I won't let anyone touch what's mine." The word mine hung in the air, thick with meaning. I didn't correct him, though part of me wanted to. Because deep down I knew he didn't mean it as possession. He meant it as protection. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling that in his world, protection and control often walk the same line. One night, after another long day of searching through files, I found him in the garden. The air was cool, the scent of jasmine heavy in the air. He stood beneath the old oak tree looking up at the stars like a man trying to remember what hope felt like. "Why do you keep fighting?" I asked quietly. "You could walk away, live in peace. You have enough power to do that." He turned to me, his eyes catching the moonlight. "Because peace means nothing if it's built on lies," he said. "And because people like us, we don't get peace until we face the fire that made us." His words stayed with me long after I went to bed. I understood now why he had found me, why he had helped me, why he had cared at all. We were both haunted by the same ghost, the ghost of truth denied. And maybe, just maybe by facing it together, we could both be free. But as I drifted into uneasy sleep that night, a voice whispered in the back of my mind, the kind that only comes when your heart knows something your head refuses to see. It said that the truth, when it finally comes, never frees you the way you expect. It burns, and sometimes it takes everything with it, flames of the forgotten truth. There are moments in life when everything you've built, every belief, every scar, every quiet piece of hope you've learned to live with, collapses under the weight of a single revelation. The night it happened, the air itself felt wrong, thick with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm breaks the sky open. I had been sitting in Lorenzo's office, surrounded by the faint glow of lamplight, going through old records for what felt like the 1,000th time. The silence was almost comforting until the clock struck midnight and the phone on his desk rang. A sharp, sudden sound that sliced through the quiet like glass. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer. But something in me said that call wasn't ordinary. I picked it up. The voice on the other end was calm, almost polite, but there was something hollow about it, something rehearsed. "Tell Mr. Moretti," the man said, "that the past doesn't stay buried forever. Some debts are due, and some fires never die." Then the line went dead. When Lorenzo came back minutes later, drenched from the rain, I told him about the call. He listened, his jaw tightening with every word. When I mentioned the phrase about the fire, his expression changed completely. The calm vanished, replaced by a kind of haunted anger I had never seen in him before. "It's him," he muttered, almost to himself. "Gabriel?" The next day, everything moved like a film playing in slow motion. Security around the mansion doubled. Lorenzo stopped attending meetings, spending long hours in his study with men I didn't recognize. Every time I tried to ask what was happening, he gave me the same quiet reassurance. "It's handled, Elisa. Don't worry." But how could I not worry when his world had started bleeding into mine? I could feel it, like smoke creeping under a door, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore.
Late one evening, unable to sleep, I went to the library. The storm outside cast flickering shadows through the tall windows, and the rain hit the glass in furious waves. That's when I saw it, a stack of folders on the table marked confidential. My name was on one of them. Against every instinct that screamed not to, I opened it. Inside were pages of investigation notes, photos, and a document that froze my blood. It was a police report linking my husband to the original warehouse where the fire started. But attached to it was another file, one marked with Lorenzo's initials. His signature was there too, dated weeks before the fire. The report listed a private transfer authorization made by him to that same location on the same day everything burned. For a long time, I couldn't breathe. The air felt heavy, poisonous. I sank into the chair, the papers trembling in my hands. Everything I had believed, every kindness, every look, every moment of fragile trust, it all cracked under that single truth. Lorenzo hadn't just been part of my past by coincidence. He had been in it. I don't remember walking to his office, only that I was suddenly there, standing in front of his desk while he looked up from his papers, surprise flickering across his face. You knew, I said quietly, my voice trembling. You knew my husband. You knew about the fire. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us like a knife. Finally, he said, "Yes, I knew." The world seemed to tilt. "You lied to me," I whispered. "I didn't lie," he said softly. I withheld what I wasn't ready to say. I laughed, a sound sharp and broken. "That's the same thing, Lorenzo. You let me believe we were victims of the same thing when you were part of it." His eyes darkened. "I wasn't part of it the way you think. I didn't start that fire. I didn't even know it would happen until it was too late." "Then why was your name on those files? Why was your authorization used for the transfer that led to that explosion?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Because Gabriel used me," he said finally. "He forged my approval, used my resources to cover his tracks. When I found out, Clara was already gone. I tried to fix it, to find the truth, but the people involved made sure every witness disappeared, including your husband." His voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to believe him, but trust doesn't grow back easily once it's burned. I stood there staring at the man who had saved me, helped me, protected Sophia, and now might have been the reason I'd lost everything. My voice shook when I said, "Why didn't you tell me? You had every chance." "Because," he said quietly, stepping closer, "I didn't want you to see me as part of the fire that destroyed your life. I wanted to be the one who gave you something after it." Tears blurred my vision, anger and grief tangling inside me. "You don't get to decide what I say," I said. "You don't get to rewrite my pain just because you regret yours." He stopped, his expression breaking into something raw and unguarded. "You're right, but I can try to make it right." He handed me another folder, smaller, sealed with a red ribbon. "That's the proof of who really did it. The bank statements, the surveillance footage, the testimonies. I've spent years collecting it. I was waiting for the right moment to use it. I thought I could shield you from it. I was wrong." I stared at the folder, the weight of it almost unbearable. The truth I had been chasing for so long was now in my hands, but instead of relief, all I felt was exhaustion. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just gives you a different kind of prison. That night, after he left the room, I sat alone for hours, the folder unopened beside me. Memories of my husband's laugh, Sophia's cries that night, the flames swallowing everything. I relived them all. For years I had wanted justice, but now that it was within reach, it felt like holding a weapon that could destroy not just Gabriel, but also Lorenzo, the man who had become the strange, broken piece of light in my life. When dawn broke, I made my choice. I would confront Gabriel myself. The next day, I found the address from the file, a crumbling warehouse on the edge of the old district, long abandoned but still heavy with the ghosts of what had happened there. The moment I stepped inside, the smell of ash and rust filled the air, and then I heard the slow clap of hands echoing in the dark. "So the maid decides to play hero," a voice said. Gabriel stepped into the dim light, older now, but with the same coldness in his eyes that I had imagined for years. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice trembling but steady. He smiled thinly. "No, Elisa, I took everything from him. You were just collateral damage. And so was his sister." Before I could speak, a familiar voice came from behind me. "That's enough, Gabriel." Lorenzo's voice, steady, calm, dangerous. He had followed me. Of course he had. The air between the two men crackled with years of unspoken hatred. "You should have stayed away, Lorenzo," Gabriel sneered. "You could have lived out your guilt quietly. Instead, you let her drag you back into it." Lorenzo stepped forward, his eyes like steel. "You destroyed 2 families to build your empire. But it ends now." What happened next unfolded too fast to process. Shouts, footsteps, the sound of shattering glass, a flash of light, and then smoke, thick and choking just like before. Someone had triggered a fire, and the warehouse began to burn again, history repeating itself with terrifying precision. Lorenzo grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the exit, shouting for me to run. But I couldn't move. I was frozen by the same flames that had haunted my dreams for years. "Go," he shouted again, his voice breaking. I looked back, seeing him silhouetted against the fire, his face illuminated by the inferno. And in that moment, I realized that whatever his sins had been, whatever truths he had hidden, he was trying to end it, for both of us. When I finally stumbled out into the cold night air, coughing and shaking, I turned back to see the building collapsing in on itself, flames consuming it whole. I screamed his name, but the fire drowned it out. The sirens came later, the flashing lights cutting through the smoke, but by then, the past had already been reduced to ashes once more, the ashes of mercy. The morning after the fire, the city woke beneath a veil of smoke. News channels buzzed with reports of a warehouse explosion in the old district. No names were released, no arrests made, just the usual whispers of gang retribution and accidental fire. But I knew better. I knew what I had seen. The moment when Lorenzo disappeared into the flames, his silhouette fading as the walls collapsed around him. It was the second time in my life I had watched fire devour everything, and this time, it had taken the man who had once been both my savior and my curse. For days, I couldn't bring myself to leave the apartment he had placed me in after the mansion was destroyed. Sophia, mercifully too young to understand, played quietly on the rug, her world untouched by the smoke of mine. But every night I heard the same sounds in my dreams, the roar of the flames, the echo of Lorenzo's voice shouting my name. I would wake drenched in sweat, his name caught in my throat like a prayer that never found its way to heaven. The authorities came, of course. They asked questions. They wanted statements. But I told them nothing. I had learned long ago that truth was a currency in Lorenzo's world. One that could buy freedom or death, depending on who spent it. Instead, I kept my silence and buried the pain under layers of quiet, mechanical routine. Every morning I cooked breakfast for Sophia. Every afternoon I took her to the small park nearby where the air was cleaner. And every night when she was asleep, I sat by the window and waited for a sign. It came on the 12th day, a knock at the door, soft but deliberate. My heart leapt and froze all at once. When I opened it, a man in a grey suit stood there, one of Lorenzo's men, his face drawn and tired. He said nothing at first, only handed me an envelope sealed in wax. "He wanted you to have this," he murmured. Then he turned and walked away before I could ask a single question.
Inside the envelope was a letter, written in Lorenzo's precise, angular handwriting. The sight of his name at the bottom made my vision blur before I even began to read. "Elisa, if you are reading this, then you already know that some fires are not meant to be extinguished. They burn until everything false is gone. I never wanted you to see the man I used to be, the one who traded conscience for power. You were a reminder that there is still light in this world, even for men made of shadows. What happened that night was not a sacrifice. It was a choice to end the circle that started the day we both lost everything. I wanted to give you something I never gave anyone else, freedom. Inside the second envelope are documents that will clear your name completely. Every debt, every record tied to your husband's past is gone. Sophia's future will be untouched. There is also a deed to a small vineyard in Florence. I bought it years ago, intending to build something that wasn't rooted in violence. I want you to make it yours. Build something beautiful out of what's left of me. And Elisa, never hide your scars again. They are the proof that you survived what tried to destroy you. If I learned anything from you, it's that survival is not weakness. It's the purest form of strength. Live, for both of us. Lorenzo." I read the letter over and over until the ink began to blur beneath my tears. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a benediction. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger when I thought of the past. I felt peace. A quiet acceptance that maybe redemption isn't something you find in a church or a courtroom, but in the choice to keep going after the fire. I opened the second envelope, and just as he said, it contained every proof I needed. The bank statements that exposed Gabriel's crimes had already been sent to the authorities anonymously. His empire crumbled within days, his accounts frozen, his properties seized. The news reported that he had fled the country, but I didn't care where he went. For the first time, I didn't need revenge. The truth had already burned him in ways no one could undo. 3 months later, Sophia and I stood on the sun-washed hills of Tuscany, where the vineyard stretched across the horizon in neat rows of green. The air smelled of grapes and promise. The house that came with it was small but warm, its walls painted in soft gold. It was nothing like the mansion I had once cleaned, nothing like the world Lorenzo came from, but it felt like home. Every morning I woke before sunrise and watched the sky turn pink over the vines. I planted roses along the stone path that led to the front door, Lorenzo's favorite flower. I even found an old photograph of him and Clara, framed it and placed it on the kitchen shelf beside Sophia's drawings. It reminded me that even men who lived in the dark could love something pure. There were times when I still heard his voice, quiet, commanding, protective. "Don't flinch, Elisa," he had said once. "The world already took enough from you." And I didn't anymore. I stopped hiding the scars on my back. I wore dresses that left them bare under the sunlight, not as marks of shame, but as symbols of the strength I had earned. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the vineyard shimmered in gold, I sat with Sophia on the porch watching her play with a stray puppy she had adopted. "Mama," she asked suddenly, "is the man from the big house ever coming back?" The question caught me off guard, but I smiled gently. "He's gone, sweetheart. But he's here too." I placed my hand over her heart. Sometimes people don't have to stay to protect us. Sometimes they become part of the light that helps us grow. Sophia nodded thoughtfully the way only children can, and went back to playing. I watched her and felt a sense of calm settle over me that I hadn't known was possible. The past no longer had claws in me. The pain had turned into soil, and from it something beautiful had grown. A few weeks later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, one taken long ago in the mansion's garden. It was of Lorenzo, standing beside a flowering tree, sunlight streaming through the leaves. On the back, in the same familiar handwriting, were just 3 words, "Still watching over." For a long time I stood there holding the photo, tears spilling silently down my cheeks. And for the first time in years, they weren't tears of grief, they were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that had shaped me, for the man who had shown me that even those born in darkness could choose light, and for the future that lay ahead, unwritten, uncertain, but mine. Years passed, and the vineyard became something more than a home. It became a refuge for women who had suffered what I once did, women who carried invisible scars both inside and out. I built a small foundation in Lorenzo's name, one that provided shelter, education, and safety for those who needed to start over. People called it the House of Second Chances, and sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind carried the scent of grapes and roses through the air, I imagined Lorenzo walking beside me, his hands in his pockets, that familiar half-smile curving his lips. I liked to think he would have been proud of what came after the fire, proud of the woman who refused to be broken by what had once burned her, because in the end, that's what survival really is. It's not just about escaping the fire, it's about learning how to bloom in its ashes.